Pucks with Haggs is powered by PrizePicks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network.
Welcome to another edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. Pucks with Haggs is powered by PrizePicks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network. I believe this is the 95th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. I have with me today Boston.com's Conor Ryan. We're going to talk all kinds of things Bruins, and we'll talk a little bit of NHL too. Conor, thank you very much for joining us. Before we get into it, though, I just want to get into the sponsors of the show real quick. First of all, PrizePicks, the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Instead of battling thousands of other players that could be pros or sharks, you simply pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections. I wish you could do the number of times that Kyrie Irving is going to flip the bird at the TD Garden fans when the Mavericks and the Celtics play each other. Conor doesn't have enough fingers on his two hands, I think.
I know.
It might be beyond the 2 to 6 player stat projection there. But I think that if you like daily fantasy sports, I think the Celtics-Mavs matchup is going to be just catnip for those kinds of people. They're going to be into it. PrizePicks is the way to do it. And let's also thank Game Time. Game Time is something that takes the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets. Speaking of the Celtics and the Mavs, if you want to go to the game, use Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create the account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Conor. Before we get into the actual structured discussion here, thank you for joining us. And what is on your mind currently with the Boston Bruins, if anything? Is there anything sort of percolating in your brain when you think about this team, the offseason, the season that we just had? Because I don't think we've had you on since the season ended. Just something that's stuck with you at this point with the Bruins right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the overall maybe sentiment I have, Joe, is just anticipation, I guess, in terms of this offseason. Because, I kind of, a lot of my stuff that I put together after the season ended was, you look at the previous 2 years when the season ended, it was a lot of, I think, a different mentality or mindset from what we had the last, they lose in Carolina in 2022. Yep. It's like, all right, is this it for Bergeron? Like, oh, crap, what are we going to do here? And then last year, it wasn't, I guess, maybe set in stone just yet that Bergeron and Krejci were retiring, but you see the writing on the wall. You can see what their cap situation was. Yep. And I think Bruins fans were like, oh, this is going to hurt. This offseason, I think you do have a great opportunity if you're Don Sweeney and the Bruins to, build off of a team that I think exceeded expectations, had a lot of guys step up. That, you look at the younger players like Alori, obviously Jeremy Swayman made big strides. Like, for the first time in a long time, you have a chance to really build on top of a foundation that might be slightly ahead of schedule from what I think a lot of people expected. Now, I think the big question now is you have this great opportunity, but what are you going to do with that money, right? Like, there's a lot of ways you can go, but I think we could look at this team in the start of September and look at 1 or 2 signings they made and be like, all right, this covered a need. Or we could look at how it was a few years ago when, like, they went out and got, like, Derek Fulbert and some of these guys were like, these guys could work, I guess, but is it moving the needle really? Like, I think it all comes down to, with the cap space the Bruins have, are they going to get guys that really move the needle, or are they going to be guys that can plug into the roster? And I think I'm looking forward to see how the Bruins approach this, because this is a great clean slate for them to have, and there's a lot of guys out there, but who are the right guys to really go after, I think, is the bigger question.
Yeah, and the bottom line is there's a lot of pressure on Don Sweeney and the Bruins management group right now to don't F it up. Like, you need to hit home runs. You need to get extra base hits with these free agent signings. And, they've been mostly good, and to your point, mostly good with the sort of lower end free agent signings, the under the radar free agent signings, the Morgan Geekies of the world. Like, players like that is Don Sweeney and the Bruins management group's bread and butter. Like, they crush those signings routinely. The smaller money guys, where they get a lot of good value. They see somebody that could flourish in a bigger role in Boston, or somebody, the Parker Weatherspoons of the world, the Brazeaus of the world that are kind of languishing in another organization or stuck in a numbers game, and they bring them here and they develop a little bit more. Like, all that stuff they are excellent at. I have full faith in them when they make those kind of signings. And I think Don Sweeney's done really well at the trade deadline now too. He's got a track record the last, I don't know, 5-6 years of really hitting home runs at the trade deadline, getting impact players, signing them to extensions, figuring out too, and I talked about this on the last podcast. I think something they've figured out lately is that you can add those physical players that you need for the playoffs at the trade deadline, those heavy physical players. And that's something they've started doing the last few years too. And really, I think started to understand that you need to even if you have some of those players on the roster, you need to augment it by adding more of that at the deadline and kind of that arms race before you get to the playoffs, where you need to be physical, you need to be heavy, you need to be hard hitting and relentless and, winning puck battles. As Cam Neely said, if in order to win 50-50 puck battles, you have to want the puck. And they have to continue to get guys that want the puck. So all that stuff, I think they do really well. The one sort of like kind of question mark in my mind for this entire front office is when they have a lot of money and they have to go after big free agents, making the right choices, spending that money in the right way. David Backes is the first name that comes to mind as a guy that they spent money on. And I remember at the time, and I think you probably remember this too, at the free agent frenzy. Originally, I think it was Bob McKenzie screwed up and said it was a one-year deal for Backes. And everybody's like, oh, okay, that's great signing. Like, that makes sense. And then all of a sudden, no, wait, it's a lot more than 1 year and it's big money. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Is this the right call? I think there's been a few times where they've kind of overextended or spent the money in a way where they felt like they had to spend it and put it on a player. And I think they felt like they needed Backes. They needed a big, heavy, hard-hitting player, like whatever. They picked the wrong horse, and they got a guy that was a little too old at that point and a little too long in the tooth and had too many miles on the odometer. But I think there's pressure on Don Sweeney to do something that he hasn't consistently done in the past, which is spend big money on free agents and hit home runs there and bring in players that are going to make a massive impact. And one other little quibbling thing with the end of season press conference, Don Sweeney mentioned a couple times he wants to bring in secondary scoring to this team. I think it's primary scoring that they need. I think they need to add primary scoring. Like, they obviously have Pastrnak, they have Marchand, but I think they need another guy that can come in and really be like a scoring threat, a dangerous player, a primary scorer. And that's going to help, other players turn into secondary scorers. And that's going to make, I think, everybody better if you have another high event player that can really like do a lot of things offensively. And that's what the money's for. They have the money to go out and get that player. I think I'd rather them go after like a Sam Reinhart and overspend for him and bring in somebody that could be a massive impact offensive player while weakening, obviously, another team that's a problem for you in the Eastern Conference, instead of like getting two like $4.5 million players that may or may not really move the needle and can kind of augment what you have, but aren't going to really like put you over the top. I'd rather have them go for a top drawer, big money player, if there's one available out there that they really like in this free agency period.
Yeah, no, it's going to be fascinating to see how they just overall approaching. But I agree, it can't just be like secondary guys. If you go out of this offseason, it's like you retain Swayman and you get like Anthony Duclair, who's like a solid player, but he's probably more of a third line guy now, coming off of his, I think, Achilles injury, whatever he had a few years ago.
Yeah.
Player that gives you some scoring punch, but isn't a guy that you look at the top of your offseason. It's like, we're all set. We couldn't score any goals against the Panthers, but Duclair is the answer. Like, you need more proven, I think, scoring talent up front, and especially when you look at the fact that you don't really know what the situation is with Jake DeBrusk. And not to say that Jake DeBrusk is this 30-goal guy. We've been waiting for him to be that kind of player, but a guy that you can dependably put in the top six and does a good job. Based on what Don Sweeney's kind of comments are, if you want to read between the lines, doesn't seem like there's a bridge to be put there in terms of that negotiations, and it seems like DeBrusk is going to go to the market where he's probably going to get a pretty good deal from someone, but I just don't see it being here in Boston. So you can't just let him walk and then get secondary talent. It
seems like they're already bracing Connor for the story they're going to give when DeBrusk signs somewhere else. It felt like that, honestly, even in the transcript they sent out.
Yeah.
Where they were talking, the quotes they put out for DeBrusk when they asked him like what his priority is, and it's like winning, being on a winning team, winning a cup, like all this stuff. It wasn't like staying in Boston.
Yeah,
it's interesting that was the quote that they chose and kind of threw out there at the time too. But I'm sure the sentiment from them is that they feel like he's going to go, and either he's already got something worked out with like an Edmonton or like, a Canadian market somewhere that's going to overpay for him. He's definitely going to get bigger money somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. So if he walks, then you have that you have to find a way to replicate that production or exceed it in terms of, and again, it's not just the production. It's a guy that, plays a good two-way game. You can depend on him in terms of 17, 18 minutes a night. Like you have to replace just that body in the lineup as well. So it's, people look at the Bruins and the fact that they have to get a centerman, which is obviously probably top of the list. But if DeBrusk walks as well, you need to find an impact winger as well. Like I can't see them, signing, let's say it's like Elias Lindholm, the top center on the market, and then just like, oh, we got Lysell or Markulov. We'll slot one of those guys up. Like you have the money and you have the urgency right now to, add another impact player and build someone that's not just going to be a role player. Like you have the money and the means now to have a guy that you can add to like the foundation of this team moving forward. And it's all about just finding that right guy for that right fit. It's unfortunate with like DeBrusk because Neely, his whole thing when they asked him what they need, it's more speed up front, a guy that can kind of win puck battles. And DeBrusk isn't this super physical guy, but you see, I think in the playoffs, guys that have that foot speed that can win pucks, can operate in grade A ice. They tend to generate good chances, especially when the ice kind of shrinks in the playoffs. So you got to find a guy that fits that mold. But it's almost like, all right, would you rather DeBrusk? Would you rather Bertuzzi, who gives you something, right? But he's not really a burner necessarily. But it's all about, I think, weighing with DeBrusk most likely being out the door, what kind of player you want on the wing, and especially what kind of identity you're looking to build up front with kind of the money that you have.
Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. The way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less than on 2 or more player stats for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. With Prize Picks, you could turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. Whether it's playoff basketball, whether it's Major League Baseball, soon enough, football will be here in the fall. But you can make a Prize Picks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're totally locked in. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week, from lowering select player stats projections on Tuesdays, which increases your chances of getting a win, to getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's download the Prize Picks app today. Super easy to use, easy to download. And use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely need speed. There's no question about it. And you continue to need to get more speed in a faster league that's always getting faster and younger. But like, you also need speed that is willing to play through bodies to get the pucks. You know what I mean? You don't need
you need Sam Bennett's. You need
yes, 100%. You need Florida Panthers speed, which is guys that have speed but also play through the body to get to the puck and don't stop and slow down when they get towards a player that has the puck and a defenseman that has the puck and is trying to collect it in the corner or the end boards. Like those guys not only play with speed, but they play with like punch you in the mouth physicality too. Those are the guys you need. You need both fast and hard. That's kind of what Duke when he was asking that question. And that's what it is. You need both of those things. If they play with the speed and with the hardness and they play through the body and just blow guys up in at full speed and go at them on the forecheck, then you start to get what Florida has, which is you paralyze every single team you play. They're doing it the Rangers too. Like those are close games, but the Rangers, like they talk about how Zibanejad and Kreider and all these guys are struggling offensively. It's because they don't have the puck in the offensive zone at all. It's the same thing that happened with the Bruins. It's the same thing that happened with the Lightning. They get stuck in their own end in the neutral zone, and it immediately goes back in their end because they can't break it out against that forecheck. They just suffocate the living crap out of other teams to the point where you can't set up in the offensive zone, and your offensive players are constantly running around the D zone or, trying to support their defensemen and worrying about getting the puck out. So, like, I really feel like that's the blueprint. And I'm so glad it is. And I'm glad the Panthers are having success because it's such an old school approach to hockey. Is having that forecheck, like that's a hard forecheck like that's based on physicality and speed. That's old school mentality. That's not like a lot of the new school stuff that you see that a lot of teams are trying to do, the run and gun style stuff. That's just hard, old school physical hockey. And I'd love to see in a copycat league, I'd love to see the Panthers win the cup and everybody decide, oh, this is how we need to play, and start getting, valuing players like that.
Yeah.
But I think, when you look at it, just as much as the speed, they need players that will run through a brick wall in order to win you a game. And that's like that's a difficult thing sometimes to value, quantify, like identify in a player.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I think it's so rare when you have those kind of players that have that foot speed, but also that fit. That's why, like, again, as a guy like Sam Bennett, you always see him stick out. It's why, like, I remember in like 2019, like Josh Anderson was a monster in that, Tampa series. Like, it's why guys like Tom Wilson are so coveted. Like these guys that are physical but have that foot speed to put puck carries under duress. And that is, I think, the big challenge for the Bruins. But I also agree, Haggs. It's like you're seeing the blueprint, and again, it's a copycat league, and I think the Panthers are, leading the charge in terms of how that approaches. But even like look at what Vegas did last year, where again, they have a lot of guys up front that are fast. Like, is Jonathan Marchessault a imposing figure at 5'8"? Hell no. But he's usually the first guy in. He's winning puck battles. He's getting in the mix. You look at what like the Dallas Stars are doing right now, where they've got a D-core where the average height is, I think, like 6'2", 6'3". And they've got guys like Wyatt Johnson. They've got these guys that are always moving their feet. They're always making plays happen. It's not like they're, again, it's as you said, there's a lot of guys that can skate very well, but they're not like generating chances off the rush. Like, they're making things happen. They're causing turnovers, and they're pouncing on these loose pucks. And you just didn't see enough of that from the Bruins in terms of just having that ability to put other teams under duress, kind of create a little bit of chaos and generate those chances. And if you're looking at the Bruins and their emphasis on quality over quantity in terms of their shot selection, that's all well and good. And like, you had guys, you had bigger bodies on. You guys had players that could really impact the game. But if you're not generating quality shot chances, then, and you're not forcing turnovers, what's the point of having the guys like James Van Riemsdyk or anything like that? So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's something that they need to continue to collect more of. And it's like they need players that play that way, and they also need players, though, that can finish, and that's part of it too. And like, it was interesting. There was somebody on Twitter had sent me this question, and I had talked about it a little bit in a mailbag episode, but I wanted to pose this to you because I think it's interesting to think about, and it's an interesting exercise with the Bruins. How many top first line players would you rate that the Bruins have right now? Like, legit, genuine first line forwards.
David Pastrnak.
Yes.
That's about it. In terms of legit top saying,
maybe Brad Marchand. Maybe Brad Marchand would be a top line player, but you could say second line at this point in his career, like a little bit older, like whatever. But like, I think those two you would say, definitely qualify for one of those two. How many second line players do you think the Bruins have? I'm sure you'd consider Marchand a second line player if you didn't.
Second line player. And then, I think it's all guys in elevated roles that are solid players. Like, Coyle Zacha did a solid job in the regular season. But again, it's like the reason why I think you need to add to this team and put guys in spots where they're better suited. Like, I'd rather, if you told me next year you have the means to add guys to this team and it ends up with a third line of Frederick, Coyle, Geeky, that's a pretty good third line.
Yes.
I think you feel really good about what your team is at. And again, it's not to like trash on Coyle for what he did in the regular season, but like, you see in the playoffs when you need more of that high-end talent, like if you're putting guys in these elevated roles, you can't expect them to carry what they did in November and December into where you are in May when you're going up against a really good Florida team. So the Bruins, I think have a lineup with a lot of good players. That's a great thing to have. But if you need elite high-end players that elevate when you get to the playoffs, you desperately need more of that moving forward.
Yeah, and it's when somebody poses you the question in that way and you start to think about it, you're like, they are definitely short a couple of, at least one top six forward, maybe two, because I would say Pasternak's obviously definitely a top line player, no question about it. I might even put Marchand as a top line player. Zacha, I think, is a legit second liner, like a wing, though. I don't think he's maybe a center. But he's a winger with defensive tendencies. He plays a full game. Like, I would put him as a second line guy. And DeBrusk, I guess if he was still there, I'd put him as a second line player, even though I think he'd be best as a third line guy on a really deep, like, excellent team. But even if you like give yourself Zacha and DeBrusk and consider DeBrusk staying,
That's 4 forwards, and there's 6 top 6 spots. Like you're definitely short, I think, a forward or two in your top 6. And that's why I think they need to go out and actual spend the money on a player instead of like trying to collect third and fourth line wingers and hope somebody pops or a couple of them elevate, or one of your internal guys, to your point, like Fabian Lysell, shows that he's ready and can step up and maybe replace a Jake DeBrusk, which, maybe that happens. That it's certainly possible. He became a really good player in the AHL. He may be able to produce at the NHL level, but there's a learning curve with a guy like that for sure.
Yeah.
Especially with some of the tendencies I think we saw out of him in Providence. It might take him a little bit to really like figure it out at the NHL level. So I'd rather see them, pay somebody 7-8 million that's gonna legit 9 million that's gonna come in here and really make an impact and score goals and make everybody else elevate their games and lift everybody else up and join Pasternak and maybe Marchand as legit, no doubt, like top of the line kind of players. Anybody that you see in the free agent market that you say, this is my guy, this is the guy I think they should get. I really like this player and he could be a difference maker here.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the talent alone, it's easy to really like what a guy like Sam Reinhart brings as a, obviously you look at, I mean, what is it, 57 goals? Yeah, like no crap. Like, I mean, I think you'd love to have a guy like that. Also, a really, really good, I think, two-way player. He's a wing, but is very defensively responsible, which Bruins sure love guys that you don't have to worry about all that much.
Yep.
I think my one issue with Reinhart is you look at his numbers and a lot of his chances are off of passes are generated off of like tips, rebounds. A lot of being I think a byproduct of being in a very talented team has helped him out. And again, he was a good player before this year, obviously, but I think if you're spending, if this guy's making 10.5 million, he's 28, 57 goal season, he's gonna get paid. If you're signing him, if you've got a team where your top 6 is still Charlie Coyle and Pavel Zacha, are you going to be a 57 goal guy, or are you going to be, a 30 goal 75, 80 point guy? Still a good player, but maybe not what you want to spend, $10 million on. So I could see Reinhart going somewhere else. Maybe he's got more high end talent to work with, especially in the top 6, maybe. But I think for me, the guy that makes the most sense, even if, is he like a slam dunk guy? And I guess that's not the best ringing endorsement, but like I think Elias Lindholm's still a guy that makes the most sense for this team in terms of just one, filling a need. Defensively responsible, helps you out in faceoffs. And I think with him, there's the expectation I think he's due for a bounce back year. Didn't really have a good season with Calgary and Vancouver in the regular season, at least, but
he had a good playoff though, right?
Yeah, had a good playoff. Is a guy that is not overly physical, but wins puck battles, operates in I think you saw in Vancouver, like in the playoffs, a lot of grade A ice. He's winning puck battles down there, doing the little things, which is encouraging to see. But I think just you look at what the need is there, the fact that he should be due for a bounce back year, and for him, that's 55, 65 points, which I think is the bare minimum what you can get from a guy like that. I think that's the guy that makes the most sense, not only for his own production, but as I said before, the domino effect of what you bring in a guy like Lindholm and how that pushes other good players into roles where I think they're better utilized, whether it's moving Zacha to the wing, whether it's moving Coyle down. I just think it makes the rest of your team better having another centerman in place.
Yeah, and I think everybody's in agreement too that like the number one priority on this team, as far as from a roster standpoint, is they need a center, a frontline, legit top 6 center, a guy that can do battle with the Sasha Barkovs of the world. Like it was obvious in the playoffs watching how dominant Barkov was against anybody they were trying to throw out there, like how much you needed somebody to at least like counteract him a little bit, and slow him down a little bit. And the faceoff thing, the faceoff issue, the carrying the puck up the ice, the offensive zone, possession time issue, all that stuff goes back to the center position. So much of that is about having centers that can get the puck up the ice fast, get into the offensive zone. In addition to, the defensive responsibilities and all the other stuff that they do, like you need somebody that's a legit guy in the league. And they, Zacha, it feels like is kind of a hybrid where he does some things really well that a centerman does, but other things not so much, especially in a top 6 level where you're expected to, be excellent at everything. And I agree with you. Like,
Charlie Coyle, I think the Bruins would be at their best if he was playing in the third line, because that would mean they'd have such a massive advantage over other teams when you match up
Right.
line to line and in the depth of their team. Like, I give him all the credit in the world because he proved something to himself, to everybody else, with the way he played during the regular season, where he did a lot of Patrice Bergeron like things. He put up Patrice Bergeron like numbers. Like, he did. He was a workhorse and he did great things for them. And it was like, he answered the call of what they needed. Like, they needed somebody to step up and play like that, and he did it. But I think you saw during the playoffs that it's a lot to ask somebody that, played at an elevated level all season, was probably playing as well as they possibly could, to try to elevate even more in the playoffs. I'm not sure it was there for him to go to that next level that, some of these players need to go to if you're going to win a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you even look at like that series against Florida. I feel like it's always the hallmark of a team that's going to go far in the playoffs when your third line's clicking. And what do you know, like in that series, who gave you a lot of clutch goals if you're Florida, but Anton Lundell on that line? Like, when you've got
he was awesome.
Lundell. Yeah. And he's their third line guy. When Bennett and Barkov are there, you can slot a very good player like Anton Lundell to be your line driver down there on the third line. And that's what a guy like Coyle can do if he's in that spot. So that's why I think getting a guy like Lindholm, really, I think puts the pieces more in place. And is he like is he the 40 goal guy he was at 1 year in Calgary where everyone went off? No, but if he gives you 60 points with that defensive play, and again, who knows what if you have a whole year with David Pastrnak, what that could be. Like, he kind of reminds me a little bit of, Ryan O'Reilly last year, where he was kind of banged up with the Blues, went to Toronto, was like a third line center. And you're like, all right, he's 33? Like, maybe this is more of what he's going to be. Ryan O'Reilly, really good player, top 6 guy, but at this age, and then he goes to Nashville and has 70 points and looks like the old Ryan O'Reilly. It's like, if you get a guy like Lindholm and you put him with a guy like Pastrnak and a new system and give him the keys to, premium minutes out there, as opposed to being kind of on the wing or whatever he was in Vancouver for most of that stretch, I think you can get, more of the, maybe not the 40 goal guy, but 25 goals, 60 points, and for how good he is defensively and how good he makes the rest of the team by, taking a critical spot in the lineup. I think if you're the Bruins, that's a guy you have to go after.
Yeah, I think they will. I mean, the one you can kind of, even if you don't have inside information on it, you can draw a lot from the context clues with the Bruins as to what they're going to do. Like, they're kind of predictable when it comes to that stuff, and it's fine because it's deliberate. You know what they're going to do, that, you know what to expect out of them. And it's why I didn't think Jake DeBrusk was coming back, because he wasn't signed like at any point during the year, and there was nothing going on. And that's usually the sign that, that it's not going to work out. But the same token, there's plenty of breadcrumbs on the trail of them liking Elias Lindholm, valuing him as a player, trying to get him last year at the trade deadline. And then there was even murmurs of maybe they're going to try to get him from Vancouver, if Vancouver was going to try to deal him. Like, there's a lot of smoke to the fire there, that they like this player and they value this player. And, that usually comes to fruition if they have the money, if the interest is there on both sides. So I would say you're right. I think the inside track on who they're going to get is a guy like Elias Lindholm. I just wonder if they can get Elias Lindholm and they can also get somebody that can put the puck in the net on the wing as well. And they're kind of going to have to, right? If DeBrusk goes somewhere else, they're going to have to bring somebody else in that is at least capable of scoring 30 goals in the league. Maybe hasn't done it yet, but has that kind of skill level, has that kind of talent. Are you excited for the NBA Finals with the Boston Celtics? You should be. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, all kinds of stars. How cool would it be to actually go to one of the games at TD Garden and watch the Celtics? My friends, we've got an option for you. Game Time will help you get those tickets. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You pick out any specific games or matchups that you love to attend, and you get good deals for those tickets. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. The all-in pricing feature shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at the checkout. And don't you hate the surprise fees? props to Game Time for no surprise fees. All right, so take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Which brings me actually to the next item on here. A lot of smoke and a lot of fire when Elliot Friedman says anything because he's so well connected. And he sort of connected the dots and started talking about Linus Ullmark in Carolina, and that they talked last year, the Bruins in Carolina, and Ullmark, that was a destination he might have gone to, and then linking Martin Necas to it a little bit as well. Do you think that there's any credence to this kind of thing happening? Would you do this if you were the Bruins? Would you do this if you were Carolina? And, what do you think of Necas as a player?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the first thing comes down to is whether or not Ullmark would, if they're on his list. I do think if you're Ullmark and you're trying to find where you want to go, Carolina does, I think, make sense for him in terms of one, it's a good team. They a pretty structured team in front of him. Like, I also feel like one thing people forget with Ullmark is that he's due a new contract. He doesn't want to go to some crap team where even if it's like Buffalo, right, where he has a good year, he's doing his job, but he still ends up with a 9-10 save percentage. Like, you're not going to get paid,
You could tell the contract was on his mind at the end of the season when he was talking to the media. It was very obvious that was a concern, and that's something he was thinking about. And that's ultimately why I think he does waive his no trade and go somewhere, because he's due another contract. He's not going to get the same earning power if he's playing 30 games here behind Jeremy Swayman and not playing in the playoffs. He'd be much better served accepting a trade somewhere where he can play and either have like a wink, like contract extension waiting for him that he already knows is going to be there, or he can play into like a bigger contract somewhere else and bet on himself with a huge season. But I think when the season gets over and he kind of thinks about it and he gets away from sort of like the allegiance to Boston and loving it here and his family loving it here, and when he talks to his agent, frankly, too, he's going to understand like the business side of it is it makes sense for you to accept a trade to a good team where you can have a monster season, and either with that team or somebody else, you're going to get a big contract extension.
Yeah, so I do think like Carolina would make sense for him in terms of whether it's be a 1-year landing spot where you can be the number one guy, play on a good team, good system in front of him, have a good year, and get paid after that. Will Carolina do it? I mean, they've got Kochetkov and Freddie Anderson signed for next year, but you look at what the returns have been in the playoffs time and time again. And it's not to say that Ullmark is a proven nails playoff guy, but if you're looking to change things up with a guy like Ullmark, that could be the case for this Carolina team that's kind of have some hard decisions to make. Like, I think ideally they'd like to keep a guy like Marty Necas, but you look at just how many guys they have due new contracts. They've got a lot of guys, a year or two down the line, especially, that are due sizable pay raises, right? You look like Seth Jarvis, who had a breakout year. Like, they can't keep all of them. So I could see the rationale in terms of you got a guy like Marty Necas who is due a nice new contract, and you're making the most of it. If you're the Bruins, I think it would make plenty of sense. Like, what would the return be? Like, would it be a straight Ullmark for Necas? I don't know if you could throw a prospect in as well. Like, I
think you would have to give up more than that. Like, I do. And this goes back to the goaltending market and the value for goalies. Like, I just don't. Sweeney was like trying to do the GM thing when it was asked about
the Corey Schneider trade. Yeah, I was like, that was a decade ago.
Yeah, that was a long time ago, and that was like a shocker at the time. Like, why are they giving all of this up? I think the market for goaltenders just isn't there. Obviously, the market is what somebody will spend to get the player. Like, ultimately, the market is set by like how desperate a team is. I just don't think anybody is going to be that desperate for any goaltender to super overspend for it. And I don't even think a hockey trade where you're getting a really good young forward, like, they're not going to give up that and say, okay, we've got a goaltender with 1 year left on his contract. Like, that's an even swap. They're going to want more than that, obviously, to make a deal like that happen.
Yeah, so I do think you have to throw something else into it, but I still think if you're the Bruins, it makes sense in terms of if you're looking at just speed. That's what Marty Necas is. That guy can fly out there. He's great at generating zone entries, all those things. He obviously he's 25. there's a lot of appeal of like, all right, just stapling next to, you know, a guy like David Pastrnak. Again, he was
Yep.
more of a right wing with Carolina. He's, I think, a natural centerman, but I think his faceoff numbers are dreadful. So I think if you're the Bruins, it has to be like, all right, we either give him the chance here. But even if he is just like a top six wing, the speed, the skill, what he brings, his age. Like if you're the Bruins and you're trying to identify guys for this year and to build for the future, like would you rather a guy like that? Or would you rather like a Tyler Toffoli, right?
Right.
Who's 32, you know, you sign him, you're going to get 20, 25 goals. But if you're the Bruins and you're trying to build this team up and you have a guy like Natchez who's shown that potential, has had a 70-point season, but probably has more to give, especially just in a new system. Like those are the guys you should be looking at. And if you're able to swap an asset where the headliner is a guy that probably isn't long for here anyway, in Allmark, and he's kind of the headliner of whatever you're going to give in that deal. That's what I think the moves you have to look at if you're Don Sweeney in terms of augmenting this team, adding a lot of skill, adding a lot of speed and scoring, while making the most of a guy that is already kind of on his way out in Allmark. Like if you're able to get a guy like Natchez out of that's a home run in terms of just making the most of what you have with an asset that, you know, people were looking at last year moving Allmark, and it was like, what were you going to get, a second, third round pick? If you get Marty Natchez as part of it, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world, I think, for the Bruins to make that deal. It makes less sense for Carolina to make that deal, where I think they might be able to get more for Natchez, which is why you'd have to add sweeteners, I think, if you're the Bruins to make it happen. But just the fact that Carolina has interest in Allmark is something to, you know, something to note. And I think that's not unimportant. I think that's a pretty important thing. That they were looking for goaltending at the deadline, that they're that unsure about what they have at the goalie position that they need to go out and get somebody like that. And, you know, I think there's also going to be, I think there should be anyway, there should be voice for change in Carolina at this point, some kind of changes, because they continue to underachieve with what they have. And obviously they're a talented team. They do really well in the regular season, but like that's a team more, I think, than the Bruins that you would look at this point and say, like, the first and second round exits are not getting to the Stanley Cup finals. Like that's a problem now at this point with that team that's been building for a while. They've got a really good coach. They've got really good players. Like what's wrong there? They, you know, something needs to get switched up a little bit with the Carolina Hurricanes. All right. This is the tweet of the week. Post 1113A is the Twitter account. Very
it's like a droid serial number.
It really is. It's something that's in the Jawa Sandcrawler.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
But this is an NHL tweet. Florida-Edmonton is Gary Bettman's nightmare scenario. Bettman wants New York-Dallas. He'll do all he can to get it. What do you think was the real reason for no suspension on Jacob Trouba? All right. This is the grassy knoll, like, conspiracy guy right here. Like, yes. I got to be honest with you. I don't think Florida-Edmonton is anywhere close to Gary Bettman's nightmare. Like, obviously, they're not huge markets, right? TV markets, whatever. That's fine.
Yeah.
There is no scenario where the face of the league, the superstar of the league, being in the Stanley Cup final is a nightmare scenario. Like, that is your biggest star, your most marketable commodity, being on the biggest stage, being able to put on a show, like, add to his legend, like, really stamp himself as one of the greatest of all time. And you've got Florida, who Gary Bettman's going to continue to want to trumpet, like the non-traditional market teams, the Sun Belt teams, the teams that he kind of worked to get into the league and be viable in the league. And at times, like, helped pay their bills to make sure they could stay in these places. Like, to have those two teams in the Stanley Cup final, I think there are plenty of things that they can trumpet, that they can celebrate, and that they can brag about and talk about the overall health and well-being of the league. Having a Canadian market in the Stanley Cup final is never a bad thing either. Like, it's nowhere close to the nightmare scenario. Really, the only nightmare scenario is for the teams and the media who would have to fly back and forth from Florida to Edmonton, which, like, good luck getting a friggin' direct flight between those two places. But like that would be, and I think that's part of the reason maybe that they built in 2 off days in between all the travel days in the Stanley Cup final. Every time there's travel, it's 2 days off, which they don't normally do. I don't remember that being a thing. Maybe they learned something from the Boston Vancouver series. Took years off of my life, all those flights back and forth and the lack of sleep. But I just don't buy anywhere that this would be a nightmare scenario. I think this would be the best series we could possibly ask for if the Oilers and the Panthers ended up playing each other in the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, I agree, Joe. I think when you look at like the things about matchups and markets, everyone looks at the TV market and all that as the main thing. But yeah, I think especially in the NHL where you're already kind of fourth on the list of teams and you're trying to stake your, get that airtime, especially like on a national stage. I think it has to be about the players, right? And I think you even look at I was watching like Sports Center a few days ago, and it was the Dallas Edmonton game, and Dallas won.
Yep.
And all the stuff afterwards was like a McDavid B-roll of him talking afterwards. Like, it's better for the NHL if Connor McDavid is having highlight reel goals in a Stanley Cup final. And these programs that aren't as invested in it can show a guy like McDavid as opposed to, Chris Kreider. Like, listen, Rangers have a lot of great players, even like Panarin, but like they don't draw the same numbers, right? And it's the same thing with like Florida. Florida, you look at their operation down there and what they have, but people now I think know who a guy like Matthew Tkachuk is off of like all the highlights of what he did last year. You look at how physical and entertaining Florida plays, like, and you look at how entertaining Edmonton plays. Like, if the NHL knows they're gonna have their passionate ingrained fans who know the Jason Robertsons and the Jake Ottingers and all these players and Chris Tanev and how good defensively he is. They already have those guys all set. They'll watch friggin' Winnipeg in the Stanley Cup final if that's what it is, right? If you're trying to get the casual fan, what better way to do it than to showcase the best player in the world in Connor McDavid against the best heel in the NHL and Matthew Tkachuk? Like, I think it comes down to the players and what they bring as a best way to market things. Like, look at the Celtics and Mavs with Kyrie Irving against Jason Tatum and all those things. Like, I think if it's McDavid against Tkachuk in that team, I think that's a win for the NHL.
I totally agree. Absolutely. I think we've just solved all the league's problems and we poo-pooed that conspiracy theorist back to his grassy knoll. Good job, Connor. I appreciate that. All right. Thank you, Connor, very much for joining us. Let's thank our sponsors real quick. Prize Picks, largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 5 million members. It is the most fun and exciting way, as I said, to get in on the action while you watch your favorite stars and sports and players. You just pick more or less than on 2 or more player stats for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. I think the NBA Finals is going to be fantastic for that. The Stanley Cup Finals will be really good for it, too, if Connor McDavid's in it. If Matthew Tkachuk's in it, you can bet how many times an opponent's going to take his mouthpiece and try to throw it into the stands. Chris Kreider style, which I certainly appreciated. That's a lot of mass hole crime right there, where he tries to throw his mouthpiece into the stands and then Tkachuk says that was the best play he made the entire game to Kreider. Like, that's total.
Well done.
Total mass hole encounter right there. I love it. But either way, you simply pick more or less than 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll right in. It's fun and really simple. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Let's also thank Game Time, which if you're looking to get tickets to the NBA Finals, if you want to go to the Garden and watch the Mavs and the Celtics, which I might even try to get a ticket to that because that is going to be fun to watch. I want to see Kyrie Irving have an absolute giant baby in a soiled diaper meltdown at center court while he's getting booed vociferously by everybody there. I can't wait to see what the mature new Kyrie Irving is going to do when the Garden comes down.
Exactly.
Goes at him. It's going to be theater. It's going to be really fun to watch. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account at Game Time and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Connor, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
You got it anytime, my friend. Let's do it again soon. All right, everybody, thank you for listening. We'll see you at the rink.